And if you do everything you can as an organization to protect your assets, your weakest link might well be your supply chain. And that was already well known.
That was David Mudd, the Assurance Global Head of Digital Trust at BSI. And I've invited him on the podcast today to discuss a game-changing new standard known as TISAX. Because one topic that has been making headlines recently is the rapid transformation of the automotive industry. But as we barrel down this road of innovation, a crucial question continuously arises. How secure are the supply chains that make it all possible? And in an era of emerging technologies where everything is becoming more connected, trust and security have never been more vital. So I've invited David on the podcast today to shed light on how the dynamics of emerging technology trends have catalysed in the creation of this new standard, and why the concept of trust has become a cornerstone in securing automotive supply chains. And we'll explore today how TISAX is more than just certification. It's a holistic approach to digital trust and cybersecurity that is aiming to streamline and secure the often complex labyrinth that is the automotive supply chain. But enough from me. Buckle up and hold on tight, because it's time for me to beam your ears all the way to South Devon here in the UK, where David is waiting to talk about all this and much more. So a massive warm welcome to the show, David. Can you tell everyone listening a little about who you are and what you do?
Thank you, Neil. Hi, everyone. Yeah, my name's David Mudd. I'm the Global Head of Digital Trust Assurance at BSI, the British Standards Institution. And in general at BSI, what we do is really helping industry to be future ready, prepare for the next big thing to prosper. And we do that through shaping, sharing, and then supporting best practice across all kinds of things across all industries. My particular area, then focusing on the assurance side, so that tends to be training, assessing, product testing, and certifying on anything in the digital space. So digital trust is the key area of focus for us. And so that for us covers digital governance and risk management, cybersecurity, privacy, digital supply chain, artificial intelligence and data. So from my perspective, being a bit of a techie geek, I get all the fun stuff.
Awesome. I love it. And as you said, you're right in the heart of the space of digital trust. And one of the things that I was reading about before you came on the podcast today was the development of the TISAX standard, or TISAX. I mean, what was the primary catalyst that led to this development? And were there any specific incidents or vulnerabilities in the automotive supply chain that highlighted the need for it? Because I feel there's got to be a story there.
Yeah, and what's, I suppose, interesting here is the need for protecting information within the automotive industry has always been a very high priority. Yeah, it's a very competitive industry. There's lots of very, very sensitive information around. And the story behind information security in general, digital or not, is if somebody wants to get your information, they'll go through the weakest link. And if you do everything you can as an organization to protect your assets, your weakest link might well be your supply chain. And that was already well known. And the need for good cybersecurity was already well known. So what was really driving TISAX wasn't so much, oh, we've had one catastrophic incident here, we need to work out how we can protect our information assets better. It was more to do with the supply chain aspects, knowing what to do, knowing what global best practice looks like. And we'll come on to maybe some of the implications of that and the detail of that later. Either you're going through this extended questionnaire every time with every supplier, or the supplier is going through all this detail every time they're bidding for a contract, and it just doesn't become tenable. So what can be done to speed up that process and allow OEMs and the supply chain to sort out who they can work with on a trusted basis without this massive load of extensive questionnaires, or with every single person, every single organization to go and get certified to the complete global standard? What was a sensible compromise to facilitate that agile and responsive supply chain? That's the main driver. So the scare stories are out there all the time, and we still see them coming through. But what you've got to focus on here is this is about making sure the whole industry to move forward and respond and be agile, especially with all these new exciting developments and technologies coming in.
And you mentioned that weakest link in security there, and I'm curious, did the emergence of technologies like IoT, AI, blockchain, etc. Did they influence the formation of this TISAX standard in any way? And are these technologies incorporated into the compliance measures?
Well, the way that the assessment scheme is structured, it leans very heavily on the ISO standard for information security, which has just gone through an update, is now information security, cybersecurity, and privacy protection. And what that does, it gets you to look holistically at your organization and the relevant risks. Now, taking a step back on that huge digital transformation sweep of it that's really happened, particularly over the last 4 or 5 years, actually the key areas of risk have been the adoption of cloud services. And I don't just mean use of, say, AWS or Google or Microsoft Azure. In a lot of the services that we use as organizations are actually cloud-based and platform-based as well. So actually, and that's where a lot of the information is, and that's where a lot of the risk lies. So in many ways, it's that area that is the primary area of focus. But rather than what you've got to think of is this scheme is here to protect confidential client data. So does it cover IoT? Does it cover AI? Only in as much as how do they impact client data. So if they impact client data, they are in scope. If they're not, they don't. So again, it's really focusing on what TISAX is all about. It's that building that trust. I'm going to share some confidential data with you so that you can do business with me and supply me with this part of my final system. Do I trust you with that data? So how you use technology, be that cloud in particular, but other things like AI and IoT, in as much as they are a risk to my confidential data, that's where it comes in.
And you mentioned that trust is an integral part of the supply chain. And as the old adage goes in business, you can't improve what you don't measure. So can I ask you to expand on how TISAX quantifies or qualifies trust and any metrics or indicators that are used to measure that trust?
Yeah, and for us at BSI, this is a really interesting point. When we look at a lot of cybersecurity schemes, especially those that are designed to be pragmatic, entry level, to be able to, for small businesses to be able to engage with them, they tend to focus very much on the technical controls. Do you have firewalls in place, anti-malware, backups, secure configuration, access control, this kind of thing. But what TISAX does is slightly different. This is really, really important. There's a cybersecurity mindset that basically says people are the weakest link. And you can see why. Something like 90% of breaches have a human that actually triggers them. So the old adage was, well, people are stupid, lock everything down.
Yeah.
But actually, if 90% of breaches require a human to trigger them, then people are actually your biggest weapon in defense against cyber attack. So we very much advocate a more holistic approach rather than just focus on the technical controls. And what's interesting about TISAX is by looking to that global best practice, the people part is a strong part of it. So part of that trust is the people. Do we trust that organization? Do they have the right positive culture towards cybersecurity? Are the people that you're dealing with, do they understand the seriousness of what they're dealing with here, their own responsibilities? So by taking that slightly wider approach and the people part, putting people as a powerhouse here for defending the confidential information, that vastly helps build that trust. And then the other key element is having that position that you adopt of, yep, okay, we're going to take this really seriously, but having that independently certified by a highly qualified certification body. That means two things. One, you can have confidence then that is valid, but also it gives a level playing field for everybody. Again, some other schemes, and even the entry level of this scheme, there's a self-assessment level. Self-assessment when you are looking at these kind of complexities is very, very difficult then to have a baseline to actually set that against. So two things, as I would say here to summarize. One is you're looking at not just technical controls, but the overall culture towards a positive cybersecurity position within the organization. And the second thing is you are then having that assessed and baselines by a skilled certification body to make sure that's consistent across the board. And those are the two factors I think that really help build trust here.
And of course, as with any new standard, there can be a hesitance or even pushback. So I have to ask, what are some of the challenges that automakers and equally suppliers might face in adopting TISAX? And How does BSI propose to overcome some of these challenges?
Yeah, again, an interesting one, Neil, because in general terms, we tend to deal with voluntary standards.
Yeah.
And they are standards that anyone can choose, and quite often they might choose them to help demonstrate conformance to the law, compliance with the law, but there's not necessarily a mandate. So quite often that's one set of challenges then of getting people to see why they should invest, particularly in certification. Here we got something slightly different. As this starts to really take hold, it then becomes a passport to actually do business. Now that's a good thing because that says, okay, well, I've got to do this now because in order to, I need to do that in order to bid for this tender or to try to get this bit of business. So that then means that there is now a kind of positive reason to actually take this forward, a direct commercial reason rather than just a risk management reason. The flip side of that is the mindset tends to be, what's the least I need to do to get this done as quickly and cheaply as possible? And that's the kind of mindset we have to overcome here. This isn't something that you can walk into and say, look, I need to get TISAX for this contract I'm bidding for next week. Can I buy a TISAX label? This is something that takes time and effort and sustained effort really to really achieve. So we have to get past that barrier of, yes, I know you need this right now. And I know it may be it's new, it's a cost you didn't expect to have. But then we're then flipping this over to say this is also ultimately about protecting your business and your business interests, and you need to do this properly. Now, to break the barriers down here, some of the key things are the approach that we take, and we'll probably come onto this in a bit more detail when I talk about how an assessment works. But the overall approach we take as an organization is, before you rush into this, first understand what the actual needs and the requirements are, get some training, take a look at it first, and then have a realistic look about what time, effort, and resources you're going to need before you start. And then maybe you think, yeah, okay, you're going to need this. Plan it sensibly. It's not something you're going to do in a week or 2 weeks or a month or a couple of months. So by taking that approach of understanding it's going to take time and effort and resource to do this, do it in stages, get to learn, get to understand, and we can help you on that journey. And getting past that, I need it tomorrow, and I just want this badge, getting beyond the badge, so to speak. Because the only way ultimately to achieve that positive cybersecurity culture and to really build that resilience within your organization, which is the aim, is to embrace it wholeheartedly as a positive thing itself, rather than just, I need a badge.
So a question I've got to ask you, is TISAX also designed with a global framework in mind, considering that the automotive supply chain is often international? Because I would imagine that jurisdictional or regional variances in data protection and security regulations is much more complex than many people listening can begin to imagine. So how do you approach this? Is it a global framework ultimately?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say particularly when we're looking at data protection, that's something that's only getting even more complex by each month. We've seen recently, in the recent couple of years, we've seen, China, Brazil, India, Mexico, all bring in their own data protection regulations in key, so we're talking about key supply chain areas there. And none of these, and India, I think, is another one just came on board with their own regulation earlier. So in these really, really key areas, bringing their own regulations in, they're inevitably not aligned. So it is very difficult. And this is where the adoption of the 27001 approach, I think, helps. When I look at elsewhere in security, there are other schemes such as payment card industry have their own security scheme. That's very, very specific. It just says, you must do this, and you must do this. Bang, 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 black and white. Yeah. With the kind of management system approach, it tends to be about, you need to define what your key external and internal factors are, demonstrate that you've addressed those, and you're taking all of those into account. So it's less prescriptive, which means it tells you to look at what are the jurisdictions that apply and ensure that you cover that. So it points you in the right direction, but ultimately it's down for the applicant to actually go through and work that out. That means it's flexible and it is totally a global scheme, but it does mean then there are complexities. And certainly for a lot of organizations, they tend to prefer, look, just tell me what to do. Tell me the 10 things I have to do, 50 things, 100 things, but tell me what they are. No, I'm sorry, it doesn't work like that. If you're looking to make sure you are resilient as an organization, You need to put the effort in to determine what are the risk factors externally and internally that apply. So just to summarize then, it is open, it is flexible, and that's the way that global best practice, the ISO standard, works as well. That means there is a little bit more of the onus on that supplier who's applying for this to do the due diligence, but that's what they should be doing anyway.
So on behalf of anyone listening that might be from a small or medium-sized enterprise, how does the TISAX standard cater for businesses of different sizes, which might not have the luxury of or the same resources as larger corporations for compliance?
Absolutely. And I think this is specifically one of the areas that TISAX was looking to address. And there are two aspects to this. The first one is there are two key assessment levels. I mentioned there's an entry-level self-assessment, which is really just for internal purposes. But then to get your TISAX label, there are two levels. And it depends on what level of confidential information that you're dealing with, or which level of rigor is then placed on assessing you. So if you're dealing in sensitive information, generally of a high level, but not the extremely high stuff, then you're at the base level kind of desktop review. Likewise, with data protection, if you're dealing with just some general data protection issues, standard information, personal information, then again, you're down at that desktop review level. It's only if you're either very, very sensitive information, or you have very sensitive personal information, or you're involved extensively with prototypes, that you then have the full in-depth factory visit and all this kind of thing then as well. So that's one level. So it depends on the sensitivity information you're dealing with. The other one goes back again to the ISO standard principle, which is basically you do what's appropriate for your organization. So you need to have you need to do your risk assessment. You need to look at a statement of applicability and what applies. You need to have policies in place, but you're looking at your own risks. So it's down to you to say, well, does this particular level of implementation of these controls match our particular risk? And obviously, the smaller organization you are tends to be, not always, but tends to be that your risk exposure across all those areas is also reduced. So to summarize them, there are two basic levels of assessment, which then determine how much you're going to have to prepare in terms of the audit and assessment. And then there is also flexibility in terms of how you put together your scope, your risk assessment, your statement of applicability, and ultimately your policies and everything you do, dependent on the size, complexity, and risk of the organization.
And I'd love to learn a little more about how BSI is also providing assurance and credibility to this TISAX standard. So can I ask you to expand on that, and also how you ensure ongoing compliance and adaptations as technology continues to evolve too? Okay,
so when it comes to our contribution directly then to the TISAX scheme, the requirements, competency requirements as an organization and as individuals to actually be part of the TISAX scheme are very extensive. So as an organization, we're the organization that developed global best practice for information security, which started off as a British standard 7799 in the 90s and then became this 27001. It's in our DNA. We're the market leaders in it. But there are other certification bodies as well. There's a minimum level that everyone has to achieve as an organization and then as a competency. So anyone going through the TISAX process, the people that we're dealing with understand the issues very, very clearly. And what does that mean in terms of our contribution here? The first thing is we've got training courses, again, qualified people delivering that training as that start point. And then it's really about how we plan, prepare, and deliver our assessments. Making sure that everyone knows what's expected of them well before we're even talking about scheduling an audit, right at the start when they want to engage with that process, all the way through to how an audit is actually handled, managed, and then even things when there is potentially a non-conformance of some sort, explaining that non-conformance in such a way that makes sense to the applicant here. And this is so important. And this is again about experienced auditing, because impartiality is absolutely critical. By that, I mean, we can't say, oh, we found this problem here. Here's what you got to do. And then we'll come back when you're ready and we'll do it again. We've got to be totally impartial. We cannot be marking our own homework. what we can do is explain quite clearly why a particular proposed solution doesn't conform. And that takes a whole culture and many, many years of experience as an individual understanding to that level of, to that depth. And that we see is really, really critical in helping both applicants and clients and the whole scheme move along whilst maintaining the level of trust in that certification and that consistency. So that's what we see our role, particularly with TISAX. As new technologies come along, that's something that we're dealing with in general as an organization. And I'm working a lot, as you can imagine now, around artificial intelligence, data management, data stewardship, for instance. And we're seeing a lot of that obviously coming into the automotive sector. Now, again, we work very closely with that whole sector in general around what does conformity, the best practice look like in that area. When it comes to TISAX and moving forward in this area, obviously it's going to be something to consider, but let's just go back to what the purpose of TISAX was, and that is very much focused on protecting clients' confidential data. So there are plenty of other things that we're looking at across BSI in terms of building trust elsewhere within the automotive sector. But if you look at the purpose of TISAX, that narrow scope is also what keeps it scalable, achievable, and doing its job of helping bring together the supply chain. So there are other issues outside of that BSI very, very much focused on, particularly around these new technologies. But when we talk about TISAX, just remember the scope of it. So it's only as much as these new technologies impact the scope.
Now, we're only a few months away from life in 2024. So as we look into the future and as the automotive industry continues to move towards electric and autonomous vehicles, how flexible is TISAX in accommodating new forms of technology, and equally any security concerns that might arise a lot further down the road?
Yeah, I think artificial intelligence is quite clearly it's the big disruptor right now. And I suppose the single biggest impact really when it comes to TISAX and protecting data is artificial intelligence sucks up data. It depends on masses and masses of data. So I think the biggest impact, again, going back to TISAX's purpose, which is about protecting confidential data, is going to be around data that's needed for AI, for training and for training AI models and for in use. And that's going to be a big, big focus area going forward, because that's the area where this purpose of TISAX, around protecting that data is most impacted. Interesting, if I'm looking at the future for TISAX, what we've got to look at actually is maybe not so much just purely confidential data within the automotive sector. As you say, maybe there's other uses, but one thing I can say is this same model, I could quite easily see this being used outside of the automotive sector, where you've got complex supply chains across plenty of other sectors in manufacturing and across the board, really. And if we can really get this model working, it becomes a very, very simple way across many industries, I think, potentially for supply chains to maintain that agility that's needed to bring new technologies and new suppliers and new ideas in quickly, but with that level of trust. So I would say the future for TISAX in automotive, I can see a huge amount around AI because of the data perspective, but also let's consider the potential outside of the automotive sector as well for this same model of trusted information security exchange.
Well, I cannot thank you enough for coming on the podcast today, sharing your insights and expertise and bringing this TISAX standard to life and demystifying it. But before I let you go, I'm going to have a little bit of fun with you today, because I always ask my guests if there is a book that they'd like to leave my Amazon wish list, or a song that inspires you or means something to you that we can add to our Spotify playlist for everyone listening. All I'm going to ask is, what would you like to leave everyone listening with, and why?
Okay, well, I suppose it's a bit cringy, so can't believe I'm admitting this in public, I suppose. But it's going to be, it's a song, and it's Mr. Blue Sky by ELO. And two reasons for that. One, it's the first record I ever bought, showing my age there. I was quite young, honest. The first record I ever bought. And at the time, I found it really kind of uplifting, inspiring. I loved the big dramatic bit at the end where it all slows down, speeds up and all of that. But it kind of somehow stayed relevant to me. I like running quite a lot. Where I live down in Devon, It's brilliant. I can go running on the beach or on the coast path. But obviously I travel a lot as well. I end up stuck on a little hamster wheel in the gym somewhere on a running machine. And I don't know about anyone else that does running, but on a running machine, once you press the button to go faster, you can never go back. So I always tend to be that maximizing, pushing myself. And it comes to, I may be doing the last 4 minutes or so. I don't know when it started, it's probably a few years back. But it's like, what's going to get me to maintain me at 16 kilometers an hour or whatever for this last final push? I'm like almost dying. And in my head, I start going that boom, 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 boom. I sing the whole of the song all the way through from the initial drum beat right to the last beat, crashing it through the end. So it's inspired me as a child, and I find it uplifting, but also I find it something that pushes me past the finish line, even now at my ripe old age as well.
Love it. Nothing cringy about that. Absolutely great tune. I just wish I could be a fly on the wall and just hear you singing as you went past, at the top of your back. Because we all sound so much better singing with our earphones in, don't we?
Absolutely.
And for anyone listening wanting to explore a little bit more detail about the TISAX standard, find out more information, connect with you or your team, where would you point everyone listening?
BSI website, and just put in there on the search term for TISAX. We've got a page on it on the website to explain everything. Feel free to reach out to me personally, search me on LinkedIn. I'd be more than happy to take up the conversation.
Well, I love chatting with you today. We've covered so much in a short amount of time, from how emerging technology trends help influence the creation of TISAX standard, and also why trust is and always will be an integral part of the supply chain. But as always, just a big thank you for coming on and sharing your story, and even having time to leave us with a great tune too. Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, Neil. It's been a pleasure.
So today, I think we've journeyed through the intricate pathways of the automotive supply chain and dissected the roles that trust and emerging technologies play in fortifying it. And big thank you to David for also clarifying how the TISAX standard is not just another certification, but a passport for conducting secure and efficient business, especially within the automotive sector. And I think the discussion reiterated the significance of taking a well-rounded approach to cybersecurity, one that spans technology, a human mindset, and even global regulations. And while TISAX was born from the need to secure the automotive industry, I think the framework's agility and thoroughness offer promising applications across various sectors. But if you'd like a deeper dive into this subject or connect with Dave and his team at BSI, you can visit their website. I'll add the links as to where you can find them nice and easily. But remember, digital trust is the future, and TISAX might just be the key to unlocking it securely. But that wraps up another episode of Tech Talks Daily. I'm Neil C. Hughes. You can get hold of me, techblogwriter@outlook.com, Neil C. Hughes across most social channels. And I invite you to join me again tomorrow, where we will do it all again with a completely different topic. But thank you for listening as always, and until next time, don't be a stranger.